Right, in this video, we've had a quick look at some of the buttons and some of the sculpting brushes and some of the kind of basic setups for relief sculpting in ZBrush. The next thing, obviously, that's great. If you're just going to start sculpting, fab, just crack on. But most of us start with a design of some sort, and we want that in front of us when we sculpt. We want to be able to use that as a background. When I learned to sculpt, we used to start with a sheet of perspex with the drawing underneath, photocopied underneath, sellotaped to the perspex, and we'd stick clay on the top of it. Then what we would do is take a drawing, get a sheet of acetate, scribe over the top of the drawing with a sharpened piece of metal, so it was like a scratched in, dust that with graphite, and then cast a disc of plaster of Paris, stick the acetate on the top, rub it down so you could see it, and use that as a guide. But of course, ZBrush doesn't have any of these wonderful traditional tools, so we've got to find another way of doing it. This is my method. There are other ways of doing it. There is a really bizarre function in ZBrush called see-through, which is up here in the top right hand corner. So you can, by changing this slider, you can actually make the whole app transparent, which some people use, put a picture underneath and use that. I can't get on with that at all. I have a different method. This is what I do. It has some good points, it has some bad points. The worst bad point being is that the reference image that I'm going to put in, won't save with the model. You have to do it from scratch. So that just needs a little bit of forethought and a little bit of preparation in order to make that an easy thing to do. That bit of preparation is that your reference images must be square. Okay, they must always be square. If you can get your reference image centrally aligned, I mean, we're all circles in this business, so that shouldn't be hard. But centrally aligned in a square canvas, you can go up to, it can be 4K, it can be 2K. 2K is probably good enough. But make it square, make everything central, and you'll be fine, because everything can click back in. But right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a background image behind my modeling canvas. I'm going to use that to give me a template that I can start to sculpt from. So we're going to come up here to the texture tab, and under texture we've got a little button that says import. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to go to, I'm just going to grab something. Let's grab this ET thing. Right, so nothing happens. Where's it gone? Where's my picture gone? Because that would be, common sense, wouldn't it, for me to import a picture and to see it straight away. Where it's gone is we go back to the texture tab, and it's now in with this little collection of textures that ZBrush has for me. I can see my image. So if I click on it and then click down to add to spotlight, click that, and you'll now get your picture in the center of the screen, and you've got this lovely little ring full of cryptic icons that mean nothing at the moment, and you'll probably not use most of them. So this is a feature of ZBrush called Spotlight, which allows you to bring an image in. What a lot of sculptors use it for is they'll bring in images of textures like skin or concrete, and they'll use it to apply those textures, either color or displacement. I mean, you've got to think, a lot of people sculpting for video games or for films are going to add their textures, and their fine detail is going to be added into the final product as a displacement or a bump map, so it's not going to be in the actual modeling. Where relief modeling differs, especially if you're going on to CNC something or you're going to laser engrave it, using ZBrush for relief differs slightly, is that you have to have all the detail in the model, and it has to go all the way through, and that does, it changes how we use some of the tools, and it creates some issues that maybe people who use ZBrush for VFX and stuff wouldn't have later on, although they're sculpting with all the detail. It's what they do with it afterwards. But so Spotlight, we've dropped our image in with Spotlight. Of course, it's not really working for us. We can't see the ring. We can't see the canvas behind us. It's too big. What a pain in the butt. What are we going to do with this? So what we have here, if we hover over this ring, so if I click in the center of this ring and move it, the picture will move around. And you'll see that this little green dot, that is the center of my modeling canvas. This little orange dot is the center of my picture. And as I come together, as I bring them together, they'll snap. You see why I said make all your pictures square. If your pictures are square, then they will line up centrally to your model. If your circular coin, because we're all about coins, if it's centrally located in a square canvas, then it will line up properly with your sculpted canvas. There's another reason it needs to be square, which I'll come to in a moment. So if I click in the center there, I can move my picture around. If I click within the orange dot, I can move the control wheel, which might not seem particularly interesting, but it does actually have a function, because the scaling of this image, which if you see is on this little icon here, is always to the center of the control wheel. Okay, so where you put the control wheel and where you put the image matters. So we can see here at the moment, right, I've got my control wheel will snap to the center of my image. Whoops. And then if I click in there, I can snap the image to the center of the modeling canvas. So now if I scale it, it will scale how I want it to scale. I always do my drawings with a rim, particularly an inside edge. That is the most important. So what I can do is I can scale so that my model lines up with the inside edge of the modeling canvas. You can see here this isn't actually quite square. That is very annoying. So scale is self-explanatory. If we come around here, you don't really need to know, you don't really need to bother with anything else except opacity. So if we click on opacity and spin it round, it does exactly what you would expect it to do, which is to make that image less visible. So now I can see my my canvas. Now if we hit Z, the control wheel disappears. We can't draw on the canvas until we've got rid of the control wheel. So we'll hit Z to get rid of the control wheel. Hitting Shift and Z turns off the picture. Really confusing, isn't it? Control Z undoes your last operation. Shift Z hides and shows your spotlight image. Z brings up the control wheel. Okay, I have these set to some shortcut buttons on my screen, on my drawing screen. But there we go. Z brings up your control wheel. Shift and Z removes your picture. Don't get them confused, because what can sometimes happen if you start to draw before you've got rid of the control wheel, you can move your drawing, and if you haven't lined everything up with a square drawing and everything's lined up in the middle, it could cause you all kinds of issues. So Z, we've got rid of our control wheel, and now we have our reference image on the canvas exactly where we want it. So I know that, you know, this is what I'm going to model, this is how I'm going to model it. Where we run into a bit of a problem now is if I move the canvas, you see I've got a bit of an issue here, is that the picture doesn't move with the canvas. So I know that I'm going to be moving this canvas around. I'm going to be turning it, I'm going to be altering it so I can see what I'm doing. I know I'm going to be doing that. So I need this drawing to move with the canvas. I really need the drawing on the canvas, like I would do if it was a plaster model. I would impart that drawing somehow onto the canvas. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. We're going to come over here, we're going to come up to clay, just because it's nice, and I'm going to select the drag rectangle stroke parameter, and I'm going to turn the alpha off. I'm going to give myself a nice big brush, and I'll leave the intensity as it is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in the middle. And if you can see what's happening here is if I turn the spotlight picture off, the brush has actually dragged my drawing into the canvas. So what it's done is it's treated the colours on the canvas like a grayscale. So the darker colours are the deeper spots, the whiter colours are the higher spots, and it's just created a three-dimensional form from that principle. So if I came in with a proper grayscale out of ArtCam, for example, that would give me a full 3D model. In fact, let's give it a go. If I can find one, shader tests, let's use this thing here. Okay, texture, add to spotlight. Okay, this is the other thing that you can have multiple pictures in spotlight. So click one, get rid of it. See, I've done what I said I shouldn't do. I have done this. Right, for some reason that one doesn't want to line up. But okay, look, so we can see here we've got a proper grayscale here. So if I do the same thing now, in theory, I should get I could turn the picture off, I should get a complete model. Curious and curious. But what it's missed, the top of the image. And the reason it's done that, if I move it over here, bump the opacity up, you can see that there's detail in there that it hasn't picked out. That is because somewhere this picture is not perfectly square, and when your reference image isn't perfectly square and it only needs to be a couple of pixels out, ZBrush does this, and I have no idea why it does this, but it's fantastically annoying that it sort of bottoms out. There may be something I'm missing. There might be some really simple solution that I've never been able to find, and it's something I'm doing wrong. I wouldn't put it past me at all, but I have found in the last 10 years that if you have a reference image that is not perfectly square, this will happen when you try to pull it out into a sculpture. But you can see the principle that with a full grayscale image, when I pull that out through Spotlight, I get a full 3D model. I'm just going to reopen a new one and go back to the picture I was using before. So that's great if you've got a full 3D model, but we haven't here. We've just got a we've just got this, a line drawing, which is fine. This is why I always ask my clients if they can to give me line drawings, not shaded artwork, because if it's just a line drawing, this next step is going to be so much easier. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the intensity of this right down. I'm going to hit Alt. I'm still in clay. I'm still doing the stroke. Let's make it a bit wider. But I've pushed the intensity right down. I'm going to hit Alt. So hitting Alt means that when I pull my stroke out, ZBrush will not see black as the lowest color. It'll see it as the highest color. So I'm going to reverse how ZBrush treats the grayscale and get rid of the picture. And then suddenly you can see what we got is a much it's much easier to handle. It's much clearer. I mean, it could go even lower. And there's something else I forgot. Let's just drop it down a little bit. Put our picture back on. Alt, pull it out. Shift Z to remove the picture, and there it is. But what I forgot, I'm so low now it hasn't affected the back. And there we got it. That's what I'm going to use as the basis for my sculpting. If you don't want to have an actual physical sculpt in there, you can do it another way. It's always handy to have floor so you can pull out centrally, because otherwise you start pulling from one end and it doesn't necessarily work. What you can do is you can turn off add and turn on RGB up here, and what happens then is when I click and drag, all it's going to do is drag the drawing onto my canvas. So it's a bit janky, but it's enough for me to see what I'm doing. Where you may run into a problem then is that once you start sculpting, so let's say, right, I'm gonna start with what? I'm gonna start with ET. I'm gonna start with his it's much too high. Much too high. I'm gonna start with his, you know, his blanket. I'm just gonna start sculpting that in, smoothing it over. And what happens to the drawing as you smooth is it kind of smudges, which can be a bit of a pain in the butt. So it can be handy, and it can be handy because this image will not save with the ZBrush file when you save it, which incidentally I haven't told you how to do, which you go to File, Save As, save it. Okay. And that will save all your undo history and everything else. It's different from exporting your subtool. If you're exporting as an OBJ or an STL, you'll come up here and you'll export it from there. You'll kind of clear it out. But saving the ZBrush file saves all the other stuff, all the undo history and everything else. But it doesn't save the spotlight picture. So doing this over the top of if you've got a sculpture half done and you need the reference image, if you just kind of pull your design out over the top in the way I've just shown you, then you can save, and when you reopen the file, you know you've still got this here. If you want to get rid of it, you can just kind of go color, fill object, and it'll get rid of it. So it's kind of handy. I tend to like doing it this way. Oops. Just because, but the way I showed you, not that way. Right, like that. There we go. I tend to like doing it this way because I just feel it gives me something to get hold of. I can see where I want to be, and then you know what you can come straight in then with, right, I want these to be quite high, so I'm gonna put a layer in there, and I'm gonna put a layer in there because I want those tires to be the same height. And then I can get into planar and I can start to fill those in, start to get these things the same height, and start to trim them off. Whoops. As I go around, this sort of stuff. You can begin to put the layers in and add stuff as you go, and then I can get in with rake if I want to and start filling that in. Ooh, it's got a why? Oh, that's why brushes it. You know, begin to put some of these markers in. Let's do it on a low one. Get the elbows in. It's going to be a bit that sticks out. Start to block it. And as I go, I'm going to wipe out what I've done. Let's really go for this. I'm going to I used to have one of these, red and yellow BMX. Back in the 80s. Okay, so I'm it's crude. I'm being really crude here, but I'm just getting the shapes in. And then once we get to a certain point where the whole thing's beginning to take some kind of form, I mean, it used to take, as a commercial sculptor, the idea of, I love clay and I love plaster, but you look at the speed that getting these first sort of rough drafts down in ZBrush is so much faster than trying to do it in clay or plaster. I can't imagine going back, just although I love the material. It just doesn't. Right, so you can kind of see, I'm it's horrendous, but I'm just doing this. I might go in with some magnify to start pushing out some of these areas to give them some form, to give them some shape before I start putting the detail in. And what I tend to do is bulk out quite aggressively and then come in with H polish at a high resolution and start to flatten it back. And what it begins to give me is it starts to give me the creases where my planes of sculpture are gonna meet each other, where I want the light to catch. As you bulk out and then sort of slice back, it begins to give you these nice little edges, which are actually quite hard to get. Use something like Dan Standard to put the edges in. It all begins to look a bit strange sometimes, and a bit kind of ersatz. I don't like this sort of outlining. So what I like to do is bulk and then flatten it back, and it sort of pushes the material and gives me these nice little sort of light catchy places. When it's done, that's the work of less than a minute, but it gives you an idea. If you squinted it, you can already see where the light's catching the front of this arm and underneath the cap and stuff. And as you start to fill these things in, one thing you'll notice that, look, if I go down to I'm used to doing it on the screen. If I go down to the lowest subdivision and I smooth out all these little marks from my drawing, I'm going to go back up to the highest subdivision. They're still here. So quite often what you have to do is get up to high subdivision and just get the smoothing brush and just go over some of these things to remove them. They all come out as they sort of go, as you go along. Okay, and then what I can do, if I feel so inclined, if I go, do you know what, I need to revisit where these lines were, I can just pull it out again, and it'll put my lines back in, so I can see where things are going wrong. With portraits, that's a particularly useful feature with portraits, because it just lets you sort of remark where everything's supposed to go. So sometimes, what it's like, sometimes stuff creeps when you don't want it to. Thing to be wary of, if you have your, let's do this, right. Thing to be wary of. Let's smooth that out. Let's really smooth that out, so I can show you what this is going to do. So you could say, well, I'm going to sculpt with the picture in the background because I'm not going to move the canvas, so I'm going to sculpt like this. But watch what happens when I start to sculpt. as you can see, it's still picking up the edge of the drawing, even though I'm not deliberately, you know, I don't want to deliberately pull that out. No, go away. That's it. It will still treat the image underneath the canvas as almost like a mask, if you like. Is probably the best way to define that. And that is because up here under brush, if we go down to samples, because that makes sense, there's a button here called spotlight projection. When that button is activated, any reference image, any spotlight image that is under your canvas will impact the sculpting. No matter how you sculpt, it will impact that sculpting. The ZBrush will recognize the picture underneath. So that's why it's really handy if you want to put texture on something. So if you have a brick wall and you don't want to sculpt all the bricks in, you can get a brick wall texture, put it underneath your canvas, and either drag out in a square or just sculpt areas, and it'll pick up the texture underneath. Same as like scales or skin or stuff. So it's a really handy for if you don't want to blanket texture something, you just want to texture it in places. You can draw over the top, you can sculpt over the top, you can sculpt a brick in and it would take up the texture of the brick. If you turn it off, then the sculpting does not is not impacted by the drawing underneath. Okay, and that's kind of the basis of how I start work, and I'll just use that process of re-inputting, you know, re-pulling out the picture to make sure I've got the details in the right spot. Sometimes what I want to do, sometimes I do a bit of work in Photoshop. If I've got a model to a point, if there's some really kind of tricky detail that I can't get because maybe, you know, the lighting is making it hard to see where I'm trying to sculpt, and I think, actually, do you know what, I want a cleaner line here, and I'm going to do that on a grayscale in Photoshop. I'm not going to do it in ZBrush. So what you can do at that point, you've got this model on screen, is you can come up to this little button here, BPR, Best Preview Render, hit that and let it do its thing, and then come over here to the Render tab, come down to Render Paths, and what it gives you is, there you go, you've got a render of your model, but you've also got a depth map, which I can then save. Where am I actually going to put it that I can test one? Okay, and I can. Did I put it in current work or personal work? Where did I put it? Where did I put it? I can open that with a photo editing app. And zoink. And there it's given me a grayscale. So what I can begin to do then is I can trim out the background if I want, or I can start doing some work on some of this. I can tidy up these wheels if I want to. Things like the spokes, I might want to put those in using something like you know, Illustrator. I might want to put those in as vectors so they're nice and straight, because with the best will in the world, hand sculpting things like spokes is a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. So nobody wants that. Incidentally, just as a plug, I use Affinity because I didn't want to pay for a subscription to Adobe for a 1,000 features I'm never going to use. Affinity is a one-off, and where I really like Affinity is that if you own all three of Affinity's apps, so Publisher is their version of InDesign, Affinity Designer is their version of Illustrator, and Affinity Photo is their version of Photoshop. If I find a picture, there we go. If you own all three, you can open any files for any of them in Publisher, and Publisher gives you the option to flick between the tool sets for all of the other apps. So if I've got this photo, this Photoshop file open in Affinity Publisher, and it allows me to click straight into Designer, so I can put my spokes in if I want to. I could do those with a vector tool and then color them so they fit into the grayscale, or I can flick straight into Photo and do some image editing work at the same time. It is the biggest biggest time saver, being able to jump between 3 programs in one without having to resave stuff or worry about it. It's really cool. So you can work if you. Sometimes I find it expedient to take a model out of ZBrush and put it into Photoshop to work on it there, if there's some really tricky stuff that I'm trying to fix. And then what I can do is bring the whole thing back in, and there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can bring it in as an alpha, so I can go and personal work, let's just bring the same thing in. Oh, it is actually square. I wonder why it didn't do that then. So I can bring it in as an alpha and just, it's not near enough, not big enough, and bring the whole thing in like that. I tell you what, let's try it with the one we've just been doing. I know it's janky as anything, but test one. There we go. So I can bring the model in that I've just made. It can be quite hard to click and drag right out. So what tends to work quite well is to make your canvas smaller, and then you don't run out of screen before you've pulled it out to the edge of the canvas. There you go. And there's the model that I've just made. So if I'd made alterations in Photoshop, they would be present now in the model. You can see I forgot to put the backface masking on, so it's sucked the rear side of the model out as well. So that is 99.99% how I do things most of the time. The sculpting is obviously, you learn, you figure out the tools that work for you and the processes that work for you in terms of actually getting the sculptured forms down. But using a reference material, I found this is the simplest way of getting a reference material onto your canvas so you can sculpt over the top and work with it. And the beauty is you've got an undo. You can always undo it if it's not working for you.